I'm determined to expose and destroy Leopold's regime in the Congo. That was Edmund Morel. My name's Kevin, and this is History Goon. What is going on, everybody? We are back again. And like I said before, this is going to be part 2 of our King Leopold II of Belgium episode. I had to break it up into 2 parts because if not, it would have been like, I don't know, 2 to 2.5 hours long. And I don't want to listen to myself talk for that long. You guys probably don't want to listen to me talk for that long. So I'm trying to do it in a little like hour and a half long chunks. So if you're joining me here today, thank you, first of all. But if this is your first episode, please go back and listen to part 1. So much happened that it would take me basically an entire episode to recap it all before we kind of got busy with episode 2. And honestly, who starts anything on part 2? I mean, you're not going to go back and watch episode 2 of Star Wars and start from there. Personally, I would personally skip part 2 and go to part 4 because those are the good ones, in my opinion, at least. The first one was boring. I hated Jar Jar Binks. Anyway, we're going to start off with a good guy, which is kind of new for this series because we haven't had any good guys yet. We're going to start off with George Washington Williams, who's an American journalist, lawyer, and political activist. He hits the Congo in 1890. He's the first outsider to have any real like verbal criticism for Leopold and what he's doing in Africa. And he wrote an open letter to King Leopold on how he felt about what's going on. And I wanted to put some of the excerpts of the letter here. I did kind of trim some of these down because he goes through 12 pretty extensive points, and I wanted to get them all in there because they're all very good points. They're all very valid points. But if I left them in here in their entirety, that would be probably close to an hour of just reading those. So we'll start off here. Good and great friend. That's a lie. I have the honor to submit for your majesty's consideration some reflections respecting the independent state of Congo, based upon a careful study and inspection of the country and character of the personal government you have established upon the African continent. It afforded me great pleasure to avail myself of the opportunity afforded my last year of visiting your state in Africa, and how thoroughly I have been disenchanted, disappointed, and disheartened. It is now my painful duty to make known to your majesty in plain but respectful language every charge which I'm about to bring against your majesty's personal government in the Congo has been carefully investigated. A list of competent and veracious witnesses, documents, letters, official recordings, and data has been faithfully prepared, which will be deposited with Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. That's a mouthful. Until such a time as international commission can be created with power to send for persons and papers to administer oaths and attest the truth or falsity of these charges. There were instances in which Mr. Henry H. Stanley sent one white man with 4 or 5 Zanzibar soldiers to make treaties with native chiefs. The staple argument was that the white man's heart had grown sick of the wars and rumors of war between one chief and another, between one village and another, and the white man was at peace with his black brothers and desired, quote, to confederate all African tribes for the general defense and public welfare. All the sleight of hand tricks, rim shot on that one, had been carefully rehearsed, and he was now ready for his work. A number of electric batteries had been purchased in London when attached to the arm under the coat, communicated with a band of ribbon, which passed over the palm of the white brother's hand. And when he gave the black brother a cordial grasp of the hand, the black brother was greatly surprised to find his white brother so strong that he nearly knocked him off his feet, in giving him the hand of fellowship. When the natives inquired about the disparity of strength between himself and his white brother, he was told that the white man could pull up trees and perform the most prodigious feats of strength. Using parlor tricks on not very advanced native folks and just being scumbags. It's not going to get better. It's not going to get better until the end of the episode, spoiler alert. The white brother took from his pocket a cigar, carelessly bit off the end, held up his glass to the sun, and complacently smoked his cigar to the great amusement and terror of his black brother. The white man explained his intimate relationship with the son and declared that if he were to request him to burn up his black brother's village, it would be done. The third act was the gun trick. This part is wild. The white man took a percussion cap gun, tore the end of the paper which held the powder to the bullet, and poured the powder and paper into the gun, at the same time slipping the bullet into the sleeve of his left arm. A cap was placed upon the nipple of the gun, and the black brother was implored to step off 10 yards and shoot his white brother to demonstrate his statement that he was a spirit and therefore could not be killed. After much begging, the black brother aims the gun at his white brother, pulls the trigger, the gun is discharged, the white man stoops, and takes the bullet from his shoe. By such means as these, too silly and disgusting to mention, and a few boxes of gin, whole villages have been signed away to your majesty. So now we're going to get into these 12, again, very good, very well thought out and worded points. Again, gonna abridge them because it would take forever. First, your majesty's government is deficient in the moral, military, and financial strength necessary to govern a territory of 1,508,000 square miles, 7,251 miles of navigation, and 31,694 square miles of lake surface. The Congo is huge. It's one of the, I could be wrong, it might be one of the, I'm pretty sure it's one of the bigger countries in Africa, like as a whole. In the lower Congo River, there is but one post in the cataract. In the lower Congo, there is but one post in the Cataract Region 1. From Leopoldville to Ngambi, from Leopoldville to Ngambi, a distance of more than 300 miles, there is not a single soldier or civilian. Second, Her Majesty's government has established nearly 50 posts consisting of from 2 to 8 mercenary slave soldiers from the East Coast. There's no white commissioned officers at these posts. They are in charge of the black Zanzibar soldiers, and the state expects them not only to sustain themselves, but to raid enough to feed the garrisons where the white men are stationed. Again, this is piss poor management and governance on Leopold's part. But he does not care, because to him, these are not people. Keep that in mind. Third, Your Majesty's government is guilty of violating its contracts made with these soldiers, mechanics, and workmen, many of whom are subject to other governments. Their letters never reach home. So he's also having people pull the mail, read the mail, and if there's anything in there negative, it's being destroyed. Either that or they are just destroying bags of mail wholesale to make sure that nobody's getting anything negative out. Fourth, the courts of Your Majesty's government are abortive, unjust, partial, and delinquent. I have personally witnessed and examined their clumsy operations. The laws printed and circulated in Europe for, quote, the protection of the blacks in the Congo are a dead letter and fraud. Fifth, Your Majesty's government is excessively cruel to its prisoners, condemning them for the slightest offense to the chain gang, the like of which cannot be seen in any other government in the civilized or uncivilized world. Often these ox chains eat into the necks of the prisoners and produce sores about which the flies circle, aggravating the running wounds. So the prisoner is constantly worried. These poor creatures are frequently beaten with a dried piece of hippopotamus skin called a Chicote, and usually the blood flows at every stroke when well laid on. But the cruelties visited upon these soldiers and workmen are not to be compared with the suffering of the poor natives who, upon the slightest pretext, are thrust into the wretched prisons here in the upper river. I cannot deal with the dimension of these prisons in this letter, but will do so in my report to my government. Keep in mind, he's American, okay, and this is 1890, so we are not technically like a world power yet, but the US is big enough and has enough money to go overseas and do something about this, which we didn't, because it wasn't. This is back when we were very isolationist and not the world police like we are today. My personal opinion, I don't think we should be the world police. I think we have enough things to deal with here that we don't need to stick our noses in everybody else's business unless it's something very, very bad going on. I don't like to talk like modern day politics on here because my political views are a little different than a lot of people's, but that's just me personally. But sixth, women are imported into Your Majesty's government for immoral purposes. They are introduced by two methods. Black men are dispatched to the Portuguese coast, where they engage these women as mistresses of white men, who pay to the procurer a monthly sum. So they are getting women to make into prostitutes on a subscription level. Oh, God. It's like Netflix for gross stuff. The other method is by capturing native women and condemning them to 7-year servitude for some imaginary crime against the state with which the villages of these women are charged. The state then hires these women out to the highest bidder, the officers having the first choice and then the men. Whenever children are born of such relations, the state maintains that the woman being its property, the child belongs to it also. I can see Williams getting exceptionally angry about this, considering that he was a black man born in 1849. Thankfully, he was born in Pennsylvania, but I know this part had to just absolutely chap his ass, probably more so than some of the other things that he witnessed. Had he been born further south in the 1840s and he witnessed this, I don't think this would have been a nicely worded. I don't think this would have been a nicely worded letter. I think this would have been a boat trip to Belgium followed by a fist fight with this giant white nerd in the castle over there. Seventh, Your Majesty's government is engaged in trade and commerce, competing with the organized trade companies of Belgium, England, France, Portugal, and Holland. Yes, he did say Belgium in there. They are his mini government inside the Congo is competing with the Belgian government because the Belgian government doesn't own the Congo. He owns it personally. So had the Belgian government owned the Congo and he was still doing this stuff, he'd be double dipping and making money off of both of them. But because he personally owns the colony, he's competing with his own country for trade routes and stuff like that, which is wild. It's really weird to try to do the mental gymnastics to make that work. It taxes all trading companies and exempts its own goods from export duty. It makes many of its officers ivory traders with the promise of a liberal commission upon all they can buy or get for the state. So now we're also going to introduce tax fraud, because we're taxing everybody else's stuff except for what's going back to Belgium, because I'm not paying taxes to send it back to somewhere where I can then sell it in my own country and also not pay taxes on it. Had this guy been around in like the 1920s, he could have killed 1,000 people and they would have got him on tax evasion like they did Al Capone. State soldiers patrol many villages, forbidding the natives to trade with any person but a state official, and when the natives refuse to accept the price of the state, their goods are seized by the government that promises them quote-unquote protection. When natives have persisted in trading with the trade companies, the state has punished their independence by burning the village in the vicinity of the trading houses and driving the natives away. So you're going to play ball the way we want you to play ball, or else we're going to firebomb your entire village. Sorry if this episode and last episode aren't quite as fun as the rest of them have been. This is a rough topic. But again, like I said last time, this is a guy that not many people know about because we like to brush stuff under the rug when it comes to history of bad things that have happened in the world. Ask Germany and Japan and us, the US to an extent, the British. Number 8, Your Majesty's government has violated the General Act of the Conference of Berlin by firing upon native canoes, by confiscating the property of natives, by intimidating native traders, and preventing them from trading with white trading companies, by quartering troops in native villages when there is no war, by causing vessels bound from Stanley Pool to Stanley Falls to break their journey and leave the Congo, ascend the Aruhawimi River to Basoko to be visited and show their papers, by forbidding a mission steamer to fly its national flag without permission from a local government, by permitting the natives to carry on the slave trade, and by engaging in the wholesale and retail slave trade itself. So this guy that went here with the quote-unquote best intentions of ending the slave trade in this part of the country is actively participating in it because he is a turd. Number 9, Your Majesty's government has been and is now guilty of waging unjust and cruel wars against the natives with the hope of securing slaves and women to minister to the behest of the officers of your government. In such slave hunting raids, one village is armed by the state against the other. And the force thus secured is incorporated with the regular troops. I have no adequate terms with which to depict to your majesty the brutal acts of your soldiers upon such raids as these. The slaves who open the combat are usually the bloodthirsty, cannibalistic Bengalas who give no quarter to the aged grandmother or nursing child at the breast of its mother. There are instances in which they have been brought the heads of their victims to white officers on the expeditionary steamers, and afterwards eaten the bodies of slain children. Oh boy. There's like that trope that used to be around of like all these like uncivilized African tribes, and they're all like practicing cannibalism and stuff. This is actual like documented proof of that happening. Not all of them did it. This one particular one did. Whew. In one war, 2 Belgian army officers saw from the decks of their steamer a native in a canoe some distance away. He was not a combatant and was ignorant of the conflict in progress upon the shore some distance away. The officers made a bet of 5 pounds that they could hit the native with their rifles. 3 shots were fired, and the native fell dead, pierced through the head, and the trade canoe was transformed into a funeral barge and floated silently down the river. 10th, Your Majesty's government is engaging in the slave trade, wholesale and retail. It buys and sells and steals slaves. Your Majesty's government gives 3 pounds per head for able-bodied slaves for military service. That's not a lot of money. I don't have an inflation calculator open in front of me. I would guess that right now that's probably around like $400 to $500 for a human being. You know, that's pretty not great, right? Officers at the chief stations get the men and receive the money when they're transferred to the state. But there are some middlemen who only get from 20 to 25 francs per head. So francs, I believe, were like, okay, so francs are French. So it's like $25 in French per person. 316 slaves were sent down the river recently, and others are to follow. These poor natives are sent hundreds of miles away from their village to serve among other natives whose language they do not know. 7th. Your Majesty's government has concluded a contract with the Arab governor at this place for the establishment of a line of military posts from the 7th Cataract to Lake Tanganyika territory, to which Your Majesty has no more legal claim than I have to be Commander-in-Chief of the Belgian Army. For this work, the Arab governor is to receive 500 stands of arms, 5,000 kegs of powder, and 20,000 pounds sterling, to be paid in several installments. 12. The agents of Your Majesty's government have misrepresented the Congo country and the Congo Railway. Mr. H.M. Stanley, the man who was your chief agent in setting up your authority in the country, has grossly misrepresented the character of the country. Instead of it being fertile and productive, it is sterile and unproductive. The natives can scarcely subsist upon the vegetable life produced in some parts of the country. Nor will this condition of affairs change until the natives shall have been taught by the European the dignity, utility, and blessing of labor. And I wanted to leave that all in his own words so that you can get an idea of what he was seeing firsthand and leave absolutely zero interpretation for myself. Kind of a bummer way to start the episode, I know. Not going to get much better. Because, oh boy. So he ended his letter like this. And again, picking and choosing parts of this because I wanted to just kind of make sure I get his point across as easily as possible. Quote, all the crimes perpetrated in the Congo have been done in your name, and you must answer at the bar of public sentiment for the misgovernment of a people whose lives and fortunes were entrusted to you by the August Conference in Berlin, 1884 to 1885. I now appeal to the powers which committed this infant state to Your Majesty's charge, and to the great states which gave its international being, and whose majestic law you have scorned and trampled upon, to call and create an international commission to investigate the charges herein preferred in the name of humanity, commerce, constitutional government, and Christian civilization. I appeal to the Belgian people and to their constitutional government, so proud of its traditions, replete with the song and story of its champions of human liberty, and so jealous of its present position in the sisterhood of European states, to cleanse itself from the imputation of the crimes with which Your Majesty's personal state of Congo is polluted. I appeal to anti-slaver societies in all parts of Christendom, to philanthropists, Christians, statesmen, and to the great mass of people everywhere to call upon the governments of Europe to hasten the close of the tragedy Your Majesty's unlimited monarchy is enacting in the Congo. I appeal to our Heavenly Father, whose service is perfect love, in witness of the purity of my motives and the integrity of my aims. And to history and mankind, I appeal for the demonstration and vindication of the truthfulness of the charge I have herein briefly outlined. Now, Leopold took offense to this, and he was not about to let a black man speak to or about him like that, so he called a big meeting of newspaper writers and basically ordered them to write a really, nasty hit piece on Mr. Williams here. This group project came out to be 45 pages of slander and absolute bullcrap that calmed everybody down, and that mostly the folks that are starting to have any kind of criticism for him, especially anybody that read what he had written. This article came out in July of 1891. George Washington Williams died in August of that year. There's nothing suspicious or malicious. He died from tuberculosis in Liverpool, England. So later in 1891, after the heat dies down, he introduces a new law in the Congo. All natural resources in the Congo now belong to the Congo Free State. So to clarify, all natural resources in the Congo now belong to Leopold personally, because the Congo Free State belongs to Leopold personally. So he was nice enough to start paying the Congolese people to gather all these resources, but they're now no longer allowed to trade with any other countries, which up until now they'd been allowed to trade with The German colonies, the French colonies, the English colonies, to a lesser extent, like the Spanish and Italian colonies, because they weren't really around. But when he first set this up, it's all supposed to be like this big hub where all these different countries can come together and trade in the Congo with like little to no tax or questions being asked. But that's now gone. Everything here belongs to Belgium. Not Belgium, to Leopold. And now Leopold starts farming out sections of the country to private businesses. And these businesses would work like private governments with their own private militaries and private law enforcement. This is bad. This is bad. Villagers around these areas started getting visits from state officials with armed guards and were told that they now had monthly quotas to hit for ivory and food. Oh, and whichever station was closest, if they needed labor, they'd be required to supply that too. The big occupation that the whites were looking for were porters. In this case, porters are basically human pack mules. At one point in time, they quote unquote went through 50,000 porters in 1 year. And I'm not real sure what went through means to these guys. I don't know if they, worked until whatever job was done or if they worked until they were dead. Didn't really go into too many specifics there. The best part is when the Congolese people stopped taking the ridiculous payments in beads and random pocket crap, they're then forced into labor. Outside people that went to the Congo to visit or conduct business said it was a normal sight. A normal sight to see lines of 20 to 50 porters chained together at the neck. And they also watched kids as young as 7 years old hauling heavy loads of ivory and anything else that they needed to be carrying. It's really, really too bad that we didn't have organizations around back then that would have sent spooky boys in here with like balaclavas and suppressed machine guns to kill all these jerk-offs, but I digress. And there's one particular station that earned the nickname of Baka Baka from the locals. Baka Baka translates roughly into capture. State agents used an item that I mentioned earlier in the Williams section, the chicote, to keep porters in line. And again, this was a good-sized chunk of like dried hippo flesh, which hippos are, I can't imagine their skin is super smooth. I've never touched one. I've never had the urge to touch one because they can like bite a car in half. But on one occasion, an agent beat 30 kids consecutively with one of these. And one of the other people at the station was like, "Oh yeah, he was laughing the entire time he did it too." They really enjoyed it. Oh, and why was he beating these kids? Because one of them was walking by with another kid and they were talking to each other and one of them laughed and he assumed they were laughing at him. So he just randomly grabs 30 kids and beats the piss out of them with a giant rhino stick, a hippo stick. Hippo club. Oh yeah. Beating somebody with a hippo stick might be a different thing. Anyway, the worst part really is this is all above board. One chief beat 2 local servants to death in 1890 and got fined 500 francs, which is like $4,000 now. No prison time. Just, you beat 2 people to death. Just pay the fine and go back to work. It's okay. It's not like we're going to do anything. And if you thought that was bad, there's more. Leopold has a full-blown army of enforcers created called the Force Publique, or the Public Force, which was originally founded in 1885 after Leopold ordered his Secretary of the Interior, Joseph Thonenson, to build a military force specifically for the Congo Free State. The following year, in 1886, Captain Leon Roger, who was a captain of the Belgian Arbies. He was a captain of the Belgian Arbies. He has the meats. He's a captain of the Belgian Army's Carabiner Regiment. He shows up and he starts building this force and training these guys. There were other soldiers sent to help build the force and to train men, but Roger is named the commander, the commandant of the Force Publique. The entire officer corps is made up of Europeans because Leopold, Roger, and Thonenson didn't think that the Africans could or would be able to follow orders effectively or to lead effectively because they're not Europeans, so they're clearly not as intelligent as these guys that we're sending in, which is gross. I would think if I was going into a foreign nation and I had to create a military force, hypothetically, of course, because I don't have the money to create a mercenary group or anything. Hypothetically, I would think I would want a bunch of locals because, they know the territory, they know the customs, they know the people, they know the language, common sense stuff. It's the reason that the French Foreign Legion has things broken down the way they do, where they break it down by language, so that if they have to go in somewhere where everybody speaks Farsi or whatever, we can send this group of dudes in. Or if we have to go somewhere where everybody speaks Spanish, we can send these dudes in, so that we don't have the cluster mess of having to try to translate orders while we're being shot at. But what do I know? The saddest part is most of these officers and European soldiers didn't really know up front what they were going to be doing. And these men came from places like Switzerland, Italy, the greater Scandinavian area. And they did this as a way to gain military experience, even as mercenaries. And this would be a good way to, see the world, go on a once in a lifetime adventure. More importantly, to a lot of these guys, try to offer humanitarian aid to people that needed it. Because again, they didn't really know what was going on in the Congo until after they got there. And they probably thought that the only fighting they're going to be doing would be if the French or the English or the Germans got uppity and tried to invade. Sadly, not the case. Turns out they'd be enforcing the quotas on goods from the villagers. The officers leading into each village would make demands and then order the FP soldiers to send messages to the people through beatings and shootings. If the village decided to try to stand up for themselves, they were pretty frequently end up with everyone being killed and the village being torched. Quick example, a tribal leader named Nzanzu led a raid on the Baka Baka station, where he personally killed the station chief. Good on you. That's going to come back to bite you in the ass, though. They took the station over and they stopped all goods going from there to Stanley Pool, and they held it for 8 months, which is really good, considering these guys don't have firearms, naturally don't have firearms, unless they're picking them up off of these guys. And then they've also been convinced that these things are magic, so they don't know how to run them properly. And they also have been conditioned that white people are bulletproof. So they're probably not going in there with a lot of high-tech stuff. They're not rolling in with MP5s or AKs or something. They probably got bows and arrows and spears and knives and stuff like that. Anyway, they hold this thing for 8 months, and then finally the FP end up showing up, and they quash this little uprising, and they kill Nzanzu, most of his forces at the station, and damn near everybody in his home village. Whenever there was an uprising, it was basically rinse and repeat. Don't forget, the Congolese only really had the guns they could find, and again, white people are bulletproof. Another example of how the FP dealt with people came in 1895 when the station chief at Stanley Falls had 21 prisoners decapitated and then placed them ever so carefully and ever so gently in his flower garden as a warning to anyone else that thought standing up against the mighty white man was a good idea. You do have to give the Congolese credit, though, because even after a dozen or so of these large-scale rebellions, one tribal leader said, quote, "If we let the white man into this country, they will soon end all of us." And unfortunately, he was pretty accurate with what he just said there. Now we're going to introduce a side character to this story who would unknowingly contribute to what's about to get even worse for the people of the Congo. I know what you're thinking. Worse. Yes. Yes, worse. uh, Somewhere in Ireland, a man named John Dunlop is working on his son's tricycle. He's doing dad stuff. Um, he starts thinking that there has to be a better way to make the wheel. He starts thinking there has to be a better way to make the wheel. These wooden ones are just a complete pain in the hole to keep replacing and rebuilding. You go over rocks and other stuff and you're banging them up and they just don't turn right. So then a little light bulb pops on in his head and he created the Dunlop Company in 1890 and starts making rubber tires with tubes that could be inflated with air, offering a smoother ride. So if you've ever owned or sold, and unfortunately in my case, or heard of Dunlop tires, this is Dunlop tires. This is the guy. Again, he is not a bad guy in this story. He is just an unfortunate side character that, again, had no contribution to any of the bad stuff that's happening, other than the fact that he recreated the wheel in a way that we still use today. Now, to make rubber tires, obviously you need rubber. And rubber comes from rubber trees. And it turns out the Congo is lousy with rubber trees. I believe that the Congo, after, I can't remember what country it is in Southeast Asia, is the highest producer of natural rubber. But I think the Congo is top, at one point in time was top 2 or 3. So they were a big time producer because of this. Collecting rubber wasn't easy or safe. The vines that have to be cut snake through the trees up and past 50 feet in the air. Due to the demand that's being made by the Free State, each adult male in the Congo was supposed to collect 6 to 9 pounds of rubber every 2 weeks. Keep in mind, it's not like you're up there hacking off big chunks of black rubber stuff off of trees. It's a really thick white sap. So they have to collect 9 pounds of sap every 14 days. These guys would spend weeks on end in the jungle. They would sleep in wooden cages to avoid being attacked by leopards. And white travelers in the area would often find dead rubber collectors smashed to bits on the ground after falling out of trees. The Africans started refusing to do the work. One of the white officers said, quote, "The native doesn't like to make rubber. He must be compelled to do it." And they would be compelled to do it. The state agents started taking hostages. When villagers got behind on quotas, the FP would go in when the men were out gathering, and they would round up women and children and take them back to whichever station happened to be the closest. Once the quota was hit, the prisoners would be released. I think that would be a motivation to work. If your wife and child have been kidnapped by people from the government and saying, hey, if you don't work, you're not getting them back. The state agents had a literal handbook on how to do this. Here's a neat little quote from that handbook. In Africa, taking prisoners is an easy thing to do. When villagers flee to the forest, men are posted because they will return for food. You will be certain of capturing people after a brief delay. A brief delay, your Uber Eats driver hit a nail or something. I'm going to be so glad when this episode is over. I wanted to do a scumbag, and I'm doing a scumbag. The rubber business couldn't have picked up at a better time because the ivory demand had gotten so bad that nearly the entire elephant population in the Congo was wiped out. But rubber just happens to be way more profitable than ivory anyway, because you get a flat tire. You need a new tire. Tires are made out of rubber. We just so happen to collect and sell rubber. Tires don't last forever. So the rubber has to be dried in slabs and then transported because when it came out of the vines, it's like a white liquid latex. If you've ever done makeup or anything like that for like special effects makeup, that liquid latex stuff that you get to stick stuff down to your face or whatever you're putting on it to. That's essentially the original form of rubber. But over by 1900, over half of the Free State's budget was going towards the FP, who are now in full-blown raider mode. When they entered the villages, it seems like a when they entered villages, it seems like a lot of the time they did it without hesitation to shoot villagers for no reason. One of the most disturbing practices they'd started putting into place was a way to show officers how many villagers or workers or, people in general were killed in raids. And that was to bring back literal baskets of human hands. To get even worse, this was done because ammo was counted on returns to make sure that they weren't wasting bullets. 1 bullet should be missing per hand returned. And if that wasn't bad enough, if the bullet didn't kill the victim, and sometimes it didn't, these guys took to cutting hands off survivors just to fudge the numbers, to make it look good, make it look like they're doing their job the right way. Back in Brussels, our hero Leopold is living the dream. He's importing animals from Africa for zoos in Belgium. We'll circle back to that in a bit, obviously not for any good reason. He also had exotic plants brought back for the national greenhouse so that the people of Belgium could see what some of the flora was like. That part's kind of cool. For like educational purposes, where you can go, these are plants that are growing naturally and wild on a completely different continent that you are never going to see unless you come check the museum out. Cool. I mean, I guess the same could go with the zoos. Because, there's not a lot of rhinos not rhinos, but there's not a lot of hippos or elephants or like species of like small little monkeys and stuff like that running around in Belgium. I'm not sure if the gorilla had been discovered at this point or if it was still just like a cryptid. Because I know the gorilla wasn't discovered until like late 1800s, early 1900s, somewhere in there. Anyway, he also took some of his profits from the Free State to build a golf course and a royal chalet in Belgium and France. And now that I've read that, I need to reiterate, this wasn't like one golf course that went across the border of Belgium into France, or a chalet that was on the border. No, he built a golf course in France and a chalet in France, and he also built a golf course and a chalet in Belgium. So he's got plenty of money, and here's where some word is kind of sneaking out of the Congo about what's actually going on, basically for the first time since George Washington Williams visited and wrote his letter to the king. Most of this is coming from a source most people probably wouldn't believe, unfortunately, which is the church. Missionaries from across Europe and the U.S. left home to go spread the word to the people of Africa. I know it might upset some people, to think about the fact that they were actually there trying to convert folks to Christianity. But in this case, it was kind of a good thing that they were there. I know a lot of people don't like... They don't like it when folks go in and force religion on people. That seems to be on a case-by-case basis, though, depending on where you're at. But they're there teaching the native people how to read, write, how to set up worship centers made out of grass. They're preaching on Sundays. Sunday services were not mandatory for the villagers. They were just there in case anybody wanted to attend. They offered aid in the form of clothing and meals handed out by the missionaries, and unfortunately were firsthand witnesses to the aberrant behavior, to say the least, happening in the Congo. One of the more horrific sights that an American minister found was stumbling across a chief whose tribe was on good terms with the FP. The minister approached and asked the chief what he was doing, because he noticed like a small little fire. And as he got closer, he notices that this man is smoking human hands over said fire. Quote, "Here is our evidence. I always cut off the right hands to show the state how many we kill." So this is a tribe that's working for the force publique to enforce these new insane laws that they've put into place. And here's where reports start hitting England about the hostages, the slave labor, the severed hands, the mayhem going on. And now Leopold has to respond. And he plays the "I'm just as surprised as you are. I don't know what's going on" card, and said that he couldn't control what happened there. Let that settle in for a second. He controls all of the money going into it, and then he controls all of the money and supplies coming out of it. But he has no control over what's going on there. He has control over the fact that they created a military for this country to force people to work, but he has no control over what's going on in the country. Then he also pulled the whole "you can't let a few bad apples ruin the bunch" and said that he would find who was responsible for all this and have them tried in a military court, blah, blah, blah. He formed the Commission for the Protection of Natives in 1896, which consisted of 6 missionaries. 6 missionaries to look into all of the reports of violence and manglings across the 1,000,000 square miles of territory. And of course, the news sources thought him a hero for quote unquote taking action and finally doing something about what's going on. What they didn't know was that these missionaries were sent to the most peaceful parts of the country where he knew this wasn't going to be happening. And here's the wild part. They also have to pay for their own travel to investigate. So once they're in country, if they want to go somewhere to investigate what's going on, they've got to pay for their transportation, they've got to pay for their housing, they've got to pay for their food, they've got to pay whoever brought them there. Because it's not a Belgian colony, so I'm not paying for any of this. What a guy, huh? Oh, and of course, anything that they wrote had to go back to Belgium so it could be published to the news outlets. This committee met a grand total of 2 times the entire time it existed. And when those meetings happened, it was never between more than 3 of them because they were spread out so far that you couldn't get all 6 of them together at the same time because it would be almost impossible for them to all be there at the same time. 1897, Leopold is absolutely stoked. And why, you may ask yourself? Well, that's because the World's Fair is going to be in Brussels that year. The World's Fair is a huge deal. Some of the biggest things that have ever come out of the World's Fair are Cracker Jack popcorn, the zipper, the Ferris wheel, the automatic dishwasher, PBR, that'd be Pabst Blue Ribbon, was a cheap beer and then the hipsters got it, and now it's not necessarily a cheap beer anymore. The telephone, the H.H. Holmes murder castle, the Eiffel Tower, and the typewriter. I had to sneak one of those in there because it's fun. I have to make jokes where I can because this episode is not pleasant. It wasn't pleasant to write, and it's not pleasant to talk about. The 1897 World's Fair would be the debut of cotton candy and the muffler. Two pretty big deals right there. Cotton candy, for any of my British listeners, is what you guys would refer to as candy floss for some reason. Ugh. It's already bad enough for your teeth. Don't put the word floss in it, you weirdos. So put yourself in this situation. You got yourself a big wooden stick of cotton candy, and you're wandering around and stumble across the Palace of Colonies and headed, because it sounds kind of neat, right? It's a giant, big, beautiful building designed by a French architect named Alfred Philbert Aldrofi. I got French in me. I just don't speak it. And this place is filled to the brim with exotic plants and animals. Then you find the wing dedicated to the colony of the Congo. There's some cool stuff in here. They've got taxidermy animals that you've never seen before. Cool. Tables of samples of cacao and coffee, which you may have never had before. Cool. Then 3 replica Congolese villages. Cool. Until you see the folks rowing canoes around on a tiny pond and force public soldiers marching in formation, and then visitors to an exhibit throwing peanuts at, quote, animals in the exhibit. Welcome to the Belgian Human Zoo. I wish I was making that up. Leopold had nearly 300 Congolese people rounded up and forced onto ships to be used in this exhibit, and most of them never went home. So now let's get into the closest thing that we're going to have to a hero in this story, the guy that provided our opening quote, Edmund Morel. Edmund Morel was the head of the Congo Department of Shipping for the Elder Dempster Company, which controlled all of the shipping to and from the Congo. This was the company that Leopold would have hand-selected to control all of the transportation for stuff. I read in one source that this is actually also the same company that they smuggled Stanley and all those guys onto from last week, from the last episode that they smuggled onto to go down, set up all the stations and stuff like that. After the World's Fair, he started noticing some discrepancies in the bills of lading. Numerous shippings left, one after another, filled with only ammo and guns, and the agents of the Free State at the docks refused to let the ships be searched when they were shipping things back out. He was also the first one to notice just how much ivory and rubber was leaving the port regularly. By 1900, 11 million tons of rubber was leaving Leopoldville a year. And again, to keep in mind, each male in the Congo was responsible for collecting 6 to 9 pounds of rubber a week, or their family is going to be kidnapped again. Because I'm fairly confident that they very rarely hit those quotas, and they just had to keep dealing with their families being stolen from them. Oh, boy. And when these ships were returning to the Congo, they're filled almost exclusively with military equipment. The amount of things that can be considered payment or trade items for the local was non-existent. And this makes our buddy Morel here just kind of scratch his head and wonder how the natives are getting paid for their work. Then he started thinking a little bit harder, and he went, oh, they're not being paid. The Congo was being sacked by the Belgians. Like, this is like what the Goths did to Rome, except worse, because I'm pretty sure the Goths weren't collecting baskets of hands and sending them back to wherever just because. Here's a fun quote from Morel. I had stumbled upon a secret society of murderers. He had written in a diary entry. So he told his boss about all of his suspicions and all these other things that he's got going on in his head. And his boss, in turn, called for a meeting with Leopold personally. That wasn't a meeting that Leopold is going to blow off out of fear that this company could pull their business and leave all of his pilfered goods stranded in the Congo. So Bossman returns and tells Morel that the king is working on fixing the things going on in the Congo, and then offers Morel a nice big fat raise to take over the shipping route in a different country. Edmund Morel right now is 28 years old, almost completely broke. He's got a family to support. And he said in another diary entry, quote, I am determined to expose and destroy Leopold's regime in the Congo. So, translation, you can take your bribe and stick it up your ass. I don't want your money. He starts traveling the world, raising money for his crusade, and in 1903 started the West African Mail. He is writing and publishing articles from other journalists that had some knowledge of the goings-on in the Congo, and started shipping it around the world. He at one point tried to get back into the Congo, but on orders from King Leopold himself, he was stopped at the border. No big deal, because he started gaining enough influence and had a good enough reputation that he didn't have to go to the people to get their stories. They were going to come to him. Missionaries in the country sent stories and photos of people that have been tortured and killed by the FP, including a tribal leader whose head was smashed to a pulp with a rifle butt. That was probably, oh man, nowadays, like if you showed somebody that picture, it had to have had like a live leak thing at the bottom of it. For any of you guys that aren't degenerates that don't actively seek things out like that on the internet, live leak's got a lot of really nasty stuff on it. I don't know. Actually, I don't know if live leak even still exists. It might not be around anymore. I don't know. But yeah, you can definitely find videos and pictures and stuff like that on the internet. The internet's a crazy place. Now that these papers are making it around the world, the Brits sent word to their man at the British consul in the Congo that they are going to be looking into this effective immediately. Back in Belgium, Leopold starts getting antsy because he's starting to come under a lot of pressure from this Morel guy that he doesn't know from anybody. That's all of a sudden a thorn in his side. And he tries to worm out of it by having his spokesman write letters to news sources all over the world saying, yes, there's probably some abuse going on, but it wasn't under the order of the Congo Free State. It's just happening organically. Blah, 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 because I'm not the bad guy. Why would I condone any of that, you know? So therefore, it's nothing that he could be blamed for. Morel, being the right amount of petty, responded by printing in his paper the form that the company agents used to show how many hostages they had taken. Because one of the missionaries got a hold of this and brought him a blank to show him what this form looks like. Now, this puts Leopold on the ropes, and according to Morel, the king sent letters written by himself, not one of his cronies, that he is trying to buy him off. He even sent a representative to tell him, quote, everything can be arranged for you and your family. Morel left this meeting smiling, knowing that he was not a man that can be bought. I like this guy. I really, really like this guy because in a story full of scumbags and murderers and just some of the worst people that I've ever experienced reading about, this guy is like a petty little ray of sunshine that's like, no, I'll take your meeting. I'm not taking your money. Piss off. Bye-bye. Leopold, being a creature of habit, spent his evenings after probably not eating dinner, reading papers from around the world, and they rarely painted him in a positive light. It's not all bad, though. His wife, Marie Henriette, died in 1903 after years of reading about the woman he's traveling with, who, numbnuts, moved into one of the palaces shortly after his wife had passed. He even brought his side piece with him to his cousin Queen Victoria's funeral in 1901. Yeah, so spoiler alert, all of the royal families in Europe are all related. World War I was essentially a family feud dick measuring competition because you had Tsar Nicholas and Kaiser Wilhelm, and I don't remember if it was Archduke Ferdinand or his wife and the Queen of the King of England. They're all related. They're all cousins. Like they could have like gone to Nana's house and had a, I don't know, boiled dinner on a Sunday and figured this all out, but instead it cost tens of millions of lives, and you know, it is what it is. But yeah, they're all related. Oh, and here's the other fun thing. At the point where Leopold's wife dies and he moves his side piece in, he's 65 and she is 20. So that's super gross because he has kids that are older than her. Ugh. By 1901, he'd stopped speaking to both his older daughters because they hated him for what he did to their mother. Because he was not very... he wasn't very discreet with his affairs, especially with this woman, because he's like, no, this is a good one. I'm keeping this one. So he was buying her like villas and stuff to live in and like paying for everything for her. And apparently talking about her to his wife at points. So I'm sure that went over very, very well. Man, so again, pettiness is not above him either. He starts trying to get Parliament to change the laws in Belgium that require parents to leave their children an inheritance, whether it be monetary or physical property, anything like that. He's trying to legally cut his kids out of his will. So now the wheels start falling off for Leopold. In 1904, the representative from the British consul in the Congo, Roger Casement, returned with his findings from his investigation in the Congo. Casement had been in the Congo on and off for 20 years, but hadn't traveled real far in the country, so he didn't really know how bad it was. He was staying in Boma, which is where the consul was, which at that point in time, I believe was either the capital or like one of the bigger cities there. But he didn't go too far. During his investigation, he spent 3.5 months traveling and hearing horror stories from Africans about forced labor and hostage taking. He met with 5 guys that he had to hunt miles into the jungle to find. Not a one of them had a right hand. If you look real carefully, if you are on video on Spotify, you're going to notice that I had a super cool little video intro there after the quote. If you look at it real close, one of those pictures on there is actually a picture that I fully intended on sharing here. Let me see if I can pull it up. So one of the pictures there, that I'm not sure if when Sam made it, he put it in there intentionally or if it was accidental. But one of the pictures there shows one of these people missing a right hand. And when I say people, I mean I'll just show you. It's a kid. I mean, he's maybe, I don't know, maybe 14 years old, missing a right hand. And I didn't notice it until after like the 3rd or 4th time that I watched the video that picture popped up and I went, oh no, I forgot that I have to show that to people. So in his findings, he said that by his estimate, the population of the Congo had dropped by at very least 60% in some parts of the country. He pointed towards mass graves of slaughtered Africans at the hands of the FP. He also found that a large number of women in the country refused to have children so that they could be able to run from the soldiers when they came into their villages. He returned to his room in Boma, absolutely furious. And Leopold did everything in his power to keep this report from coming out, but failed when it was released in February of February of 1904, much to the amusement of Edmund Morel. Morel said the report that Casement had written, quote, "Finally, someone has exposed the most gigantic fraud and wickedness which our generation has known." Casement returned to England. He meets up with Morel, and they become like instant best friends. It's that scene in Step Brothers. You want to go do karate in the garage? Yep. Did we just become best friends? Yup. And they slap, high fives the whole way around. This is exactly what just happened here. Except Morel has to listen to horror stories that Casement had returned with. And they talked from like the night that they first met at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they talked until like 8:30 the next morning, and then we're like, we should probably both go to bed so we can not sleep, and then come back and talk more afterwards. So they decide, obviously, we need to make a super team, like super best friend team here to take Leopold down for good. Casement fronted Morel 100 pounds to buy a typewriter and some supplies to get started. And this is the beginning of what is known as the Congo Reform Association. Morel took to it with an absolute fury, spending sometimes upwards of 18 hours a day working in his office, writing letters. He's just punching letters out on this thing. And he's publishing everything that he can in his newspaper weekly, which I'm sure 18-hour days, probably not conducive to a happy marriage. What do I know about that? He contacted missionaries from around the world that had witnessed the atrocities to go on tours and tell what they had seen. One of these missionaries actually had his wife sneak a set of the shackles and one of the chicots back with her from the Congo, and they often showed these during the speeches. Morel was filling out lecture halls, showing slides of the abuse, the severed hands, and this obviously shocked these people that they don't know what's going on there. There was people that were fainting that were attending these, that were like literally fainting after seeing some of the pictures. And Leopold is so mad about this that after reading an article in his favorite newspaper, The Times of London, this is the biggest tragedy of our story. He read an article in The Times of London that made him so mad that he had to cancel his subscription to the newspaper. In March of 1904, Leopold is getting desperate and sent out a 37-page letter where he didn't answer any of the questions that the world would have. But he said that the casement report was filled with lies. He said that all the missionaries had lied. He said that Casement had been paying the natives that he spoke with to lie, which would have been the first time that the natives had been paid for anything, by the way, with anything other than pocket lint and shoestrings. And he claimed that all the dead Congolese were due to disease. Now, not all the dead Congolese were dead due to disease, but some of the dead Congolese were dead due to disease. We don't know the split, really, but it was probably less from disease and more from Belgian interaction. Then when the forced labor came up, he may have shot himself in the foot, because he said, in simple terms, the forced labor was good for them. It was the only way he could get them to do anything. He said that in the long run, they would thank him because it was preparing them to become part of, quote, modern civilized society. Damn. He then went on a 17-page tirade about a Congolese boy that was a focus of some of the articles, about how the FP had lopped off his hand for not working fast enough. I'm not 100% sure if that Congolese boy he's talking about is the picture that I shared, because unfortunately, that picture that I shared is not the only picture of a small Congolese boy with a missing hand. Like, if you Google Congolese missing hand, you are going to find hundreds of different images. The truth was, in fact, that he had had it bitten off by a wild boar, and that the force publique helped him to get medical attention. Of course, because they're good guys like that. To show how desperate he was, he organized a PR group in the Free State that published a pamphlet titled, quote, "The Congo is not a slave state." And "not" was in capital letters, of course, just to make sure that we really know that it was. This group of merry scumbags even resorted to bribing newspaper editors to try to keep Morel and Casement stories out of the papers. In a classic showing of journalistic integrity, they even sent their own reporters to the Congo to see if it was all that bad. In preparation for this visit, a few of the station chiefs were told to get the jails torn down and out of the way. Out of sight, out of mind. This is all, of course, too little, too late. The world is now watching the Congo, thanks to the work of Morel and Casement. The Congo Reform Association is now picking up some famous members, including a Polish prince, a very well-known French journalist whose name I can't pronounce, the power odd couple of Booker T. Washington and Mark Twain. The guy that created a character in Huckleberry Finn called, N-word Jim. He's on board with trying to help out these people in the Congo. Turns out by this point in his life, he wasn't a huge slavery guy. In his younger years, Mark Twain was kind of like, meh. He was indifferent to it at best. So Leopold now started another investigation because he's having his feet held to the fire here. He sends 3 judges from Belgium to the Congo that would take basically the same tour that Casement did. Over the course of 4 months, they interviewed 370 people, including a chief named Lantulu, who, when he entered the room, laid 110 twigs on the table. They kind of look at him like, what the hell is this? And then he explains that each twig represented a member of his tribe the Free State had killed. They returned to Boma and brought the findings to the governor, and he reads everything. And I like to imagine he just kind of like whap and just like smacked his head on the desk and was like, yeah, this is all true. The commission's report was released in November of 1905. The story was similar to what Casement had told him, but now it couldn't be blamed on lying natives and missionaries. This is the final nail in Leopold's coffin. The people in Belgium turned on him. They called him and his failed colony an embarrassment to their nation, which it absolutely was, and he absolutely was. He was on vacation with his child bride in the south of France on one of his yachts when that report came out, and he just kind of hung out there until the end of 1906. By that time, he was pretty tired of dealing with everything, and the British government demanded that he turn over rule of the Congo to the Belgian government. So from there, he told his prime minister to start the process. Quote, "The Belgian people are tired of me. They want no more of me. Honestly, Leopold, I'm tired of you, and I want no more of you." So in 1907, Leopold is 72 years old, and he starts getting a little batty. I can tell you from my line of work, I can't tell you exactly what I do or where I do it. This is probably early onset dementia. He's probably starting to feel the beginnings of dementia. He starts riding around the grounds of his palace on a giant tricycle. He's drinking a huge amount of warm water because he thought it would, quote, help fight off disease. This is the weirdest part. He starts having his newspapers ironed before he would touch them to kill germs. If an aide sneezed within earshot of him, they were sent home. If Caroline, his child bride, wanted time away from him, she would just cough a couple of times and he'd ask her to leave. He also started some weird building projects in his old age. He had a platform built off of his office so that he could watch the construction of a nearby building that had nothing to do with anything he was doing. He's just a curious old man. They get nosy and strange. He also had a giant stone archway built in the center of Brussels that he used some of his money made in the Congo to build. The locals started calling it the Ark of Severed Hands because the stories of all the hand choppings have come out. And he built it with blood money. And honestly, I don't know if that thing's even still standing. I never even looked into it to see if it is. That'd be interesting to see. In November 1908, residents in Boma joined for a ceremony when Belgium officially took control from Leopold and announced some changes. The people of the Congo could now gather rubber, ivory, and all the other natural resources freely. They could trade with whoever they wanted. They would pay taxes, obviously, and money, and the government couldn't force them to work anymore. That's really not as good as it sounds because basically it went from slavery to indentured servitude because they have to make money to pay taxes, and the government and private companies still owned the majority of the country. So now they would have to go to work in mines or in giant farms to make enough to pay taxes. But at least they're not going to have their hands cut off and their families kidnapped. So, silver linings, I guess. In December of 1909, Leopold starts getting sick. Some sources say that it may have been a form of cancer. I couldn't find one way or the other. Either way, I hope it hurt. He and Caroline were married in a quick ceremony. His daughters returned to Brussels when they found out that he was sick, and he refused to see them. December 16th, a group of doctors operated on him to try to remove whatever form of cancer this is. And he died the following day, December 17th, 1909, from an embolism. And again, I hope it hurt. His new wife was escorted from his side, crying and sad. She then tried to return to her home and found that her key doesn't work anymore because his daughters Louise and Stephanie kicked her ass to the curb and started trying to settle his estate. And the first thing to do there was to make sure she can't get into the house. After his death, the crown of Belgium fell to his nephew, Albert I of Belgium, who I am going to cover for a very different reason than Leopold. Albert was awesome. He was fantastic. The ensuing years were full of the Belgian government trying to get his money squared away because he claimed not to have made any money from the Congo. He was just doing this for love of the game, obviously, but turns out he had millions of francs in secret companies and made up foundations. One of the companies that he had stashed money in owned 58 high-end properties across the city of Brussels. Another company owned $45 million worth of artwork and jewelry. It's estimated that in 24 years as the king and ruler of the Congo, that he made about 220 million francs, which today translates to about $1.4 billion. And right before he died, he had all of the financial records for the Congo destroyed. Because he wasn't doing anything shady, obviously, of course. So let's jump ahead to 1919, right after World War I. The Belgian government did a study and found that the Congo's population had fallen in half between 1880 and 1919. That figures out to be about 10 million dead or displaced Congolese people in a 40-year period. To be fair, Leopold and his cronies couldn't be blamed for all of it. In 1901, something called sleeping sickness killed about 500,000 people, and then thousands more died from smallpox. There's really no way of knowing how many of that 10 million figure died by the hands of the Force Publique and other Free State agents. And for all the evil he was definitely privy to in the Congo, Leopold never got blood on his hands once. Matter of fact, he never once visited his prized colony in the Congo. And I want to end this part with a quote from a Swedish missionary as he watched the FP at work. Quote, "It's strange that people who claim to be civilized think that they can treat their fellow man any which way." Now, in 1934, a member of the Master Confectioners of Antwerp, Jos Hacker, introduced a new little sweet treat to Belgium. He created, I'm going to screen share it here. He created little chocolate hands. And if you look at them real close, they're all right hands. The former mayor of Antwerp tried to explain that the hands have no connection to the horror show that was the Congo. He instead tells the story of a mythical giant that once lived near the Schled River that charged a toll to cross the bridge. Classic bridge troll move, I know. This is like Bridge Troll 101. You should really be expecting this by now with bridge trolls. I mean, honestly. If you couldn't pay the toll, he'd cut off a hand and toss it into the river. I don't know if I find that more unbelievable, trying to pin it on a troll legend, to the fact that this guy is, the guy that just told the story, is now the Prime Minister of Belgium. And I don't want it to forget, in 1958, the World's Fair returned to Brussels, and as part of the Ethnological Expo, a Congolese village was built. 273 men, 128 women, and 197 children were on display. In 1958, this is the same year the U.S. launched Explorer 1, which was our first satellite into orbit. We're starting the space race with Russia, and Belgium is putting human beings on display. Dwight D. Eisenhower is being seen on national TV in color, and people are probably throwing peanuts at Africans in a human zoo at the same time. In Europe, 2 years after the Congo declared its independence. And somehow most people here don't know who Leopold II of Belgium was, and up until fairly recently, Belgian schools still spoke of him as a hero. If you go to the Belgian monarchy's official website, what he was responsible for is barely mentioned. I'm still trying to figure out how, when the US did something awful in history, and we have to feel bad for it for the rest of time. Europe genocides countries all over the world, and it's treated like a, whoops, sorry, it happened. And I hate that. I hate Leopold. I hope he had dick cancer. I hope it fell off before he died, and I'm glad this is over. So, yeah. If you want if you want more content and early access to stuff, you can head on over to patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month gets you early access to my show. It gets you early access to 911 calls with the operator. It gets you early access to Tethers and Almost Fiction with Chase. Also gets you early access and backdoor access to Guestnicity with Luther, and also the Never Daily with like everybody. That's a Never Daily is a fun one. If you want just random stuff, just like a random good time conversation, that's a good one to check out. And again, $5 a month. It's well worth the money. And if you want to support me directly, you can go over to ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. You can leave me a donation there. You can, $5, whatever. I'm not going to beg you for money. I hate doing that. You can do it one time. You can set it up as a recurring thing. Anything is appreciated. Man. Oh, also, you probably have seen it by now. I have an Instagram for the show. It's History Goon Pod on Instagram. Basically just episode updates when they come out and stuff like that. But yeah, you can go over to facebook.com and hit History Goon Podcast on there. Join the gang. We got a bunch of people in there just being goofballs and posting history stuff. Man, yeah, other than that, again, next episode will be a palate cleanser, I promise, because I need it too. We're going to have fun next time and not talk about a genocidal maniac that killed an entire country. So until then, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world like Edmund Morell and Roger Casement. Thanks, guys.